The Xoran fleet descended upon Earth, each ship a marvel of alien engineering, sleek, metallic vessels that hummed with unnatural power. From their high command ship, Supreme Commander Zorath looked down on the blue planet, her mind already calculating the success of their mission. Her species had raised hundreds of worlds before, their technology far beyond anything humanity could comprehend. They had never failed, and this time, they wouldn't either. Zorath's hands rested on the control panel as she oversaw the landing strategy. Earth had no chance. Their military, primitive at best, had no way of countering the advanced weapons the Xorans possessed. With their ships capable of incinerating entire cities with a single blast, there was little reason to believe they would meet anything but an effortless victory. "We will land in strategic locations," Zorath instructed her commanders. "The human governments will crumble under the weight of our force before they even have time to respond." The invasion had been planned for years. The Xorans knew that Earth was still in its infancy, technologically speaking. A few scattered nations with clumsy, old-world weapons, nothing compared to their quantum energy weapons, their cloaking technologies, their anti-gravity fields. In the past, other species had yielded almost immediately when faced with such overwhelming firepower. "Prepare the ground forces. Execute the landing in 3 hours. If they offer any resistance, we will crush them swiftly." Zorath's cold, calculating voice echoed through the command chamber. She watched as the invasion fleet broke into sections, each ship sending smaller landing pods to various regions of Earth. The first wave would target major cities: New York, Beijing, Moscow. The second wave would secure critical infrastructure, power plants, military bases, communication hubs. By the time the humans understood what was happening, the Xorans would have complete control. As the ships breached Earth's atmosphere, Zorath leaned forward, her eyes scanning the massive holographic map of the planet. The human signals were faint, barely noticeable. The communications grid was primitive, vulnerable. Nothing to worry about. The Earth's defense systems were old and poorly coordinated. Even if they managed to launch a counterattack, the Xorans would be long gone before the humans could react. The planet's atmosphere, dense and turbulent, seemed to respond as their ships descended, but Zorath brushed it off as nothing more than an inconvenience. However, just as they entered the lower atmosphere, something unexpected happened. The sensors blinked, a slight glitch in the system. The Xoran ships, typically immune to all but the most advanced forms of jamming, suddenly experienced a strange disruption. The readings on Zorath's display flickered, a subtle anomaly. Her hand tightened on the command panel. "Report," she ordered sharply. A subordinate's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, there's an interference pattern in our communication signals. It's unexpected. Could be some kind of primitive technology scrambling our frequencies. We are unable to identify its origin." Zorath frowned. "Impossible. Earth's tech is decades behind. No human technology should be able to." Before she could finish, an alarm sounded, cutting her off. The control room filled with the harsh beeping of an incoming threat. In the blink of an eye, the Xoran fleet was rattled by a sharp impact, a wave of electromagnetic pulses slamming into their ships from all directions. They weren't weapons, they were signals. Communications. They were being jammed, and for the first time, Zorath realized that Earth might not be as defenseless as she had assumed. The invasion, perfect in its design, suddenly felt like it might not go quite as smoothly as planned. Zorath's mind raced as she glanced at the rapidly deteriorating data streams. The Xoran fleet, once unchallenged in its path, now faced unexpected interference. It wasn't just a minor glitch. The pulse waves were growing stronger, more frequent, and now they were starting to interfere with their weapon systems. "What's happening?" Zorath snapped, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the rapidly changing diagnostics. "Commander, it appears that the human forces have somehow gained access to our comms frequencies. They're broadcasting a signal we can't decode. one of her officers reported. "It's nothing we've ever seen before. Primitive technology, but highly effective." Zoreth clenched her jaw. How? How could they have developed anything like this? The response came quickly, but the uncertainty in the officer's voice only deepened the unease swelling within Zoreth. "It seems they have some form of electronic warfare. It's scrambling our long-range sensors, and our cloaking systems are beginning to fail. The human resistance is already reacting." With the fleet's integrity compromised, Zoreth knew they couldn't risk wasting time. She made a swift decision. Activate secondary systems. Begin the ground assault immediately. Make the humans feel the full force of our power. She then turned to the strategic overview, locking her gaze on the cities they were targeting. Despite the communication setback, the invasion must continue. As the first Xoran landing pods broke through the atmosphere, Earth's skies darkened with the ominous presence of the fleet. The military forces on the ground, still largely unprepared for such an event, scrambled in a desperate attempt to mobilize a defense. Their radar systems were chaotic, flickering between static and garbled information. Panic began to spread. But then something unexpected happened, something no one had accounted for. In the middle of the chaos, a signal, human in origin, emerged, loud and clear. It wasn't a formal broadcast. It wasn't a military order or plea for help. It was a message that reverberated with a raw, unscripted power. "This is our world, and you're not welcome here." The message was broadcast across every major human channel, from news stations to radio frequencies, hijacking the very airwaves the Xorans thought they had secured. It was simple, direct, and filled with an undeniable certainty. For the Xorans, who were used to effortlessly dominating weaker species, this was a shock. There was no fear in the human voice, no panic. There was only defiance. At Ground Zero, where the first Xoran soldiers were beginning to deploy, the resistance was already preparing. Civilians, scattered across the cities, had suddenly mobilized, an uncoordinated swarm of people with no prior military experience, yet their urgency and desperation to protect their homes forged an unexpected resilience. People ran to underground shelters, while others set up makeshift barricades using whatever they could find: metal pipes, scrap wood, even street signs. The idea of survival wasn't just a goal. It was a rallying cry. By the time the first Xoran shock troops landed in New York, they were greeted not by a terrified population, but by organized pockets of resistance. The humans had no tanks or advanced drones, but they had the willpower to make their enemy feel the sting of every shot fired. The Xoran forces, expecting to intimidate the humans with sheer technological superiority, found themselves met with chaotic but determined retaliation. Resistance fighters using simple rifles and homemade explosives ambushed the landing troops from every corner of the city, making it clear that this would not be an easy conquest. "We're not done yet," one of the human resistance leaders, Captain Jason Harlow, muttered under his breath as he surveyed the growing conflict. The humans were outgunned, outclassed in nearly every way, but there was something about their response that seemed to unsettle the Xorans. As the Xoran soldiers attempted to advance, they found themselves being outmaneuvered by human tactics that felt almost unpredictable. The humans weren't following any pattern they could detect. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like they had nothing to lose. The city was a maze, and in every alley and rooftop, the humans were waiting. The first battle was a failure for the Xorans. Their highly advanced weaponry faltered under the weight of an enemy they had never seen before. Humanity's refusal to accept defeat, their determination to fight for their world. It was a small victory for Earth, but it sent a powerful message to the invaders. This world would not fall without a fight. Zoreth, watching the chaos unfold from her command ship, narrowed her eyes. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen," she muttered. "We underestimated them." In that moment, the Xorans realized the scale of their miscalculation. The invasion, which had seemed so flawless on paper, was now facing an unexpected resistance they couldn't yet understand. and the fight was just beginning. The first few days of the Xoran invasion were chaotic. Their fleet, once poised for a smooth and efficient takeover, now faced a world of resistance that defied all logic. The cities they had hoped to overwhelm quickly had become battlegrounds, not just of military might, but of human ingenuity and willpower. As the Xoran forces attempted to expand their foothold in New York, Beijing, and other major cities, they were met with a kind of warfare they couldn't predict. Guerrilla tactics. No one had warned them that humans would fight not like soldiers but like survivors, using every available resource to sabotage, ambush, and frustrate their high-tech adversaries. The Xorans began to realize that humans did not rely on a single form of warfare. Every group of resistance fighters seemed to have a different style of battle. Some attacked in small, mobile units that evaded Xoran tracking systems, while others launched seemingly random strikes against Xoran supply lines, blowing up convoys with homemade explosives. Every time the Xorans thought they had secured an area, a new wave of human fighters emerged from the shadows to strike back with ruthless efficiency. Captain Jason Harlow, one of the first human commanders to organize the resistance, stood in the midst of a crowded command center in a makeshift bunker under New York's ruined skyline. His face was grim, but his eyes burned with determination. "They want to wipe us off the map," he said, rallying his men. "Let's show them how we do things on our planet. We'll give them a fight they'll never forget." He knew that the humans were not equipped to go toe-to-toe with the Xorans' superior firepower. But they didn't need to. What they did have was adaptability, the ability to use their surroundings to their advantage. The skyscrapers that the Xorans had intended to use as vantage points for sniping and observing. They were now perfect cover for human ambushes. The labyrinthine alleyways, once thought to be weaknesses, became places where humans could vanish and strike from the most unexpected angles. Across the globe, similar scenes were unfolding. In Moscow, a group of civilian engineers and mechanics quickly seized control of a military installation that had been abandoned during the chaos. With makeshift tools and limited resources, they modified old tanks and armored vehicles, turning them into unpredictable fighting machines. In the African savannas, farmers and tradespeople turned their agricultural knowledge into battlefield tactics, using the land itself to create traps and snares that took out Xoran ground troops. The Xorans had expected to overwhelm human cities in a matter of hours. Instead, they were now facing human resilience that appeared to grow stronger with every battle. And as each skirmish unfolded, something else began to happen. The morale of the Xoran invaders started to crack. Zorath watched from her command ship as reports flooded in from across the globe. The Xorans had taken many key positions, but at what cost? Their losses were mounting, not just in the form of soldiers, but in precious time. A few days into the invasion, it was clear that Earth's inhabitants were far from beaten, far from defeated. They were resourceful, determined, and every small victory they achieved only fueled their hunger to resist more. "These humans," Zorath muttered, her voice thick with frustration. "They are fighting with the desperation of cornered animals." Her officers were silent, watching the tactical screens as more and more resistance movements popped up, independent of each other but coordinated through underground networks. Humans were sending messages, encrypted communications that bounced off satellites, uniting them under a single banner. Survival. "We thought they would break, but they're adapting faster than we can calculate," Zorath said, her voice low. "We underestimated their capacity to fight back. They're not just resisting, they're learning. Every time we strike, they become harder to defeat." Despite their technological superiority, the Xorans had no countermeasure for human unpredictability. They couldn't predict the way a small group of civilians would turn a crowded subway station into a fortress, or how a fleet of junkyard-rolling engineers could rig a Xoran tank to explode with a single shot from an antique rifle. Back in New York, Captain Harlow stood atop a rooftop, surveying the battlefield below. The streets were alive with movement as the resistance prepared for the next wave. The Xorans were regrouping, readying their next assault. But the humans weren't backing down. In fact, they were preparing to take the fight directly to the heart of the Xoran forces. "We may not have their weapons," Harlow said to his lieutenant, "but we got something they can't beat. Not today, not tomorrow." He gripped his weapon tightly. "We fight on our terms now." The world was in chaos. The Xorans had expected an easy victory, but they were learning the hard way. Earth wasn't going down without a fight. And for every Xoran they took down, the humans grew stronger, more united. The resistance wasn't just a collection of random insurgents. It was a movement, an idea, one that the Xorans had never encountered in their entire history of conquest. The invasion was far from over. But one thing was becoming clear: the humans would not surrender. The Xorans had always prided themselves on their intelligence, their ability to outthink and outmaneuver their enemies. For centuries, they had conquered countless worlds, and each victory had been achieved with precision and calculation. But as the days wore on, it became clear that Earth's defenders were unlike any adversary they had faced before. They weren't just surviving. They were adapting in ways that Xoran strategists struggled to comprehend. Zoreth stood in the command center of her flagship, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The War Council had been convened, and her officers were briefing her on the unfolding situation. Reports were coming in from all over the planet. Attacks on supply lines, sabotage at key installations, and even human forces organizing in ways that seemed impossible given their apparent lack of resources. "These humans, they don't follow any logic," Zoreth muttered, frustration thick in her voice. "Every time we try to predict their movements, they surprise us. They don't behave like any other species we've conquered." Her chief strategist, General Thras, leaned over the tactical display, studying the maps. "They're not just fighting back. They're learning. Every attack is more coordinated, more precise. We initially assumed their inability to communicate effectively would work in our favor, but now they are using it against us. They've cracked our codes. They're disrupting our supply chains. Even our command infrastructure is vulnerable to their unorthodox tactics." Zoreth's gaze hardened. "Then what are we doing to stop it? We're attempting to locate their central hubs of resistance, but every time we think we have one, it disappears. They move like shadows. Our attempts to strike at their leadership have failed. It's as if they've anticipated every move." Zoreth's eyes narrowed, her mind working quickly. She had long understood that Xorans won through sheer strength, overwhelming force, superior technology, and perfect coordination. But humans had no such advantage. They fought with the kind of unpredictability that turned every engagement into a test of wills. She turned to her intelligence officer, who was analyzing human broadcasts intercepted from their communications network. "What else have we learned about them?" The officer hesitated for a moment before responding. "Their resistance is growing. It's not just the military. They've united civilians from every corner of the globe. There are no designated leaders, at least none we can identify. It's more like a movement, a message." Zoreth was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "What is their message?" The officer shifted uncomfortably before replying. "It's simple. We are not your slaves." Zoreth felt an unexpected wave of doubt ripple through her. She had thought she understood this species. Their governments were divided, their technology crude by Xoran standards, and their military coordination laughable. Yet, somehow, they were proving to be an incredibly resourceful enemy. In every corner of the world, from the dense jungles of the Amazon to the icy wastelands of Siberia, there were pockets of resistance, human cells organizing, striking out against Xoran troops with an almost feral determination. This was no longer a matter of technological superiority. The Xorans' greatest asset, control, was slipping away. The humans, despite their lack of advanced weaponry, had something far more dangerous: a unified spirit. Zoreth could see it in every report. Humans would rather die fighting than submit to their invaders. That was a force she had never encountered before, and it terrified her. "You said they were learning," Zoreth said, her voice suddenly sharp. How? General Thras spoke up again, his voice trained. They've studied us. They've learned how our ships move, how we communicate, how our forces operate. They've disrupted our tracking systems. They've developed countermeasures for our technology, and they've adapted faster than we can recalibrate. Zorath's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Then we must change our approach. We cannot continue fighting them with the same tactics. They are not acting like a conventional enemy. They are thinking and adapting. For the first time in the war, Zorath acknowledged what she had long refused to see. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons or technology, but in their mindset. They weren't merely fighting to survive. They were fighting to protect what was theirs, every inch of their world, every piece of their identity. And they had something that no Xoran weapon could destroy: the unyielding desire to remain free. As Zorath mulled over her next moves, a deep, unsettling thought settled in her mind. The Xorans were not just fighting for dominance anymore. They were fighting to conquer an idea that was spreading like wildfire across the globe. The idea of resistance. Humanity had become a force that could not be ignored, and it was beginning to look like the Xorans would have to either crush that idea or face a war they would never win. Prepare for the next phase, Zorath said coldly, a plan forming in her mind. We will strike at their core, where their resistance is strongest. But we will not simply invade. We will break their spirit. We will show them the cost of defiance. But deep inside, Zorath wondered whether it was already too late. The humans had proven to be far more than a temporary obstacle. They had become an existential threat, a force that might just turn the tide of the war. Zorath stood at the edge of her command ship's observation deck, watching Earth from above. The planet she had once viewed as an easy conquest now seemed like an insurmountable challenge. The humans, despite their technological limitations, had become a thorn in the Xoran side, and no matter how many battles they won, the resistance seemed to grow stronger, more determined. We need to strike at their heart, Zorath said, her voice cold and calculating. We need to show them the true cost of defying us. Her generals stood in a tight circle around her, each wearing the same look of frustration and uncertainty. None of them had ever seen an enemy like this before, one that fought not with weapons, but with a burning desire for survival. But Zorath was unwilling to accept defeat, not yet. She was a Xoran commander, and the Xorans had never been bested. She would not let this be the first time. The humans have something we cannot predict, General Thras said quietly. Their adaptability. It's extraordinary. Every time we strike, they learn. They evolve. We've underestimated them, Zorath admitted, her fists clenching. But it will not happen again. The Xorans had launched a series of surgical strikes on key human strongholds, thinking they could cripple the resistance once and for all. But instead of faltering, the humans had responded with counterattacks that left Xoran forces scrambling. Now the battle was taking place in every corner of the world, from urban centers to rural farmlands, and it seemed that humanity was always one step ahead. Zorath's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the latest reports. The human leadership may be decentralized, but they are coordinating their efforts. They've learned how to leverage their technology against us, and they are using their home advantage, their planet, to outmaneuver us. But even as she spoke, a cold realization settled over her. It was no longer just about technological superiority. The humans had a spirit, a unity that the Xorans could not destroy with their weapons alone. That unyielding defiance was now the greatest weapon the humans had in their arsenal. Launch the new assault plan, Zorath ordered, a new, more aggressive strategy forming in her mind. We will strike directly at the heart of their resistance. Their communications network will disable their ability to organize, and without that, they will fall. The Xoran fleet moved into position. The plan was straightforward. They would destroy the communication hubs and disrupt the human network, cutting them off from each other. Without their ability to coordinate, the resistance would crumble. But as the first wave of Xoran ships descended on the human command centers, they encountered something unexpected. The human resistance had prepared for this. As the Xoran ships approached, they were met by an overwhelming barrage of fire that they had not anticipated. The humans had reverse-engineered Xoran technology. Using captured Xoran tech from previous battles, the Resistance had built makeshift anti-ship weapons that could penetrate the Xoran ships' advanced shields. The Resistance had learned, adapted, and now they were striking back with weapons that were far more effective than the Xorans had imagined. "Shields are down. We're taking damage," one of the officers in the fleet reported, his voice laced with panic. "The humans have created their own weapons." Zorath's heart skipped a beat. They were prepared, more prepared than she'd thought. The Resistance had used their desperation as an asset, and it was paying off. The Xorans' flawless invasion plan was starting to unravel thread by thread. "Retreat, regroup, and recalibrate," Zorath barked. "We need to rethink our approach. This planet is more difficult to conquer than we thought." Meanwhile, on the ground, the humans were rallying. Captain Harlow and his unit had received word that the Xorans were attempting to target the global communications network, the nerve center of their resistance. Without hesitation, Harlow gathered his most trusted fighters. "We've beaten them before," he said, his voice fierce with determination. "We can do it again. This time, we stop them from cutting us off. We fight, not just for survival, but for the future of this planet." The humans were mobilizing in ways that Zorath could not have predicted. Local militias, guerrilla units, even everyday civilians. Everyone who could hold a weapon was now a part of the struggle. They were more than just a ragtag group of resistance fighters. They were becoming an army. Zorath's fleet, though advanced and powerful, was not immune to the humans' tenacity. Their makeshift weapons had found weaknesses in the Xoran defenses, and the resistance was growing bolder. The humans were no longer simply defending themselves. They were starting to go on the offensive. But the Xorans still held most of the planet's cities, and their advanced technology meant they could strike fast and hard. They would not give up easily. Zorath knew the war was far from over. They would need to hit harder, adapt faster, and strike where it hurt the most. "We will bring their cities to the ground, if we must," Zorath vowed, staring out at the chaos unfolding below. "But we will not let this world slip from our grasp." As the battle raged on, both sides understood that this was not just a fight for territory anymore. It was a battle for the soul of Earth itself. The Xorans had underestimated humanity, and they were beginning to feel the consequences of that miscalculation in every confrontation. Zorath had known from the beginning that this would be a difficult war, but she never imagined that the humans would adapt so quickly. Their resourcefulness, their unity, and their unwavering will to fight were becoming forces in themselves. They were more than just a nuisance now. They were a genuine threat to the Xoran invasion. The communication strike, aimed at crippling the human resistance, had failed. The Xorans had underestimated how deeply embedded the human network had become. Even as their key communication hubs were attacked, the humans were able to relay messages through alternate channels, some of which the Xorans had never anticipated. The global resistance was still functioning, still connected, and still pushing back. Zorath stood in the war room, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. The tactical maps displayed on the screens flickered as data continued to pour in from all fronts. The Xoran forces had taken several key cities, but their grip was weakening. The resistance was everywhere, growing larger, more organized. Every day, more humans joined the fight. And it wasn't just civilians who were contributing anymore. Captured Xoran tech had allowed the humans to build their own sophisticated weapon systems. The tide was turning. "How are we losing this?" Zorath demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "We have superior technology, superior forces. How are they still holding out?" General Thras, standing at her side, sighed. "They are fighting differently than we anticipated. They are not relying on sheer force, as we would. They've adapted to our strategies, and learned how to counter them. And worse, they'd found a way to turn our technology against us. Zorath's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the reports. The humans had found ways to hack into Xoran weapon systems, causing their energy grids to malfunction. The sabotage was effective. One of the Xoran battleships had been disabled, its power grid short-circuiting from a simple EMP pulse, developed from Earth's own resources. It was a blow that could not be ignored. "We need to stop them from gaining any more ground," Zorath said, her tone now colder, more resolute. "This ends now." Across the globe, the battle raged on. In New York, Captain Harlow led his resistance unit to the front lines. The city was in ruins, but the human spirit remained unbroken. Every day, new units of fighters were arriving, and they had begun to reclaim some of the lost ground. They no longer fought defensively. They fought with purpose, with strategy. The humans were becoming an army, and their strength was not just in their numbers. It was in their belief that they could win. "This is it," Harlow said as he surveyed the ruins of what used to be one of Earth's greatest cities. "We take back what's ours. We push them back, and we make them understand. This planet isn't theirs. It never was." The resistance had evolved. What had started as small, scattered groups of civilians was now a well-organized military force, using tactics they had learned from Xoran battle strategies and their own ingenuity. They knew the Xorans were vulnerable in ways they hadn't initially understood. Their over-reliance on advanced technology had created weaknesses that the humans could exploit. The very tools the Xorans had used to invade were now being turned against them. Back in the war room, Zorath's eyes flickered over the new intelligence reports. "The humans are striking back at our power sources," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "They know how to cripple our energy supply." Her officers were silent. The realization was clear. Humanity wasn't just resisting. They were winning. "We need to do something drastic," Zorath said, her gaze shifting to the holo map showing human resistance strongholds. "Send a fleet to target their major urban centers. We will wipe them out. No mercy." General Thras nodded, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "Are you sure, Commander? We've already seen what happens when we try to destroy them outright. They come back stronger. It's not just a military fight anymore. They're fighting for their survival. They're fighting for something we can't understand." Zorath's face hardened. "I understand it perfectly," she said. "They fight because they have no other choice, and they fight because they think they can win. But they're wrong. We will show them the true meaning of power. We will break their spirit." Despite her confident words, Zorath couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was pushing her forces into a losing battle. Each day, the humans fought back with more tenacity, and the Xorans were starting to lose their grip. The human spirit, their refusal to give up, was the one thing that could not be calculated, nor conquered by force. Zorath was beginning to wonder if the Xorans could even win this war. In New York, Harlow's unit had managed to infiltrate one of the Xoran supply depots, and they were setting the stage for a full-on counterattack. With every weapon they sabotage, with every Xoran soldier they took down, the humans were proving that the invasion could be stopped. The price would be high, but they were willing to pay it. "We fight for Earth," Harlow said to his men, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of everything they had lost and everything they stood to gain. "And we fight to show the Xorans that no matter what they throw at us, we will never stop fighting." As the humans prepared for their next phase of the war, Zorath steeled herself for the battle ahead. She had no intention of letting this world slip through her fingers. But deep down, a seed of doubt was taking root. Could they truly defeat humanity's will to survive? Could they conquer a spirit that refused to bow? The war had reached a critical point. The Xorans' invasion force had once seemed unstoppable, their ships and technology superior to anything the humans had at their disposal. But after weeks of relentless resistance, the Xorans were now fighting not just against soldiers but against an idea they could not crush with weapons alone. Humanity's unyielding resolve was proving to be their greatest weapon. Zoreth's fleet had been battered. While they still controlled vast portions of the Earth, the Korans had suffered devastating losses in key battles. Her command staff was on edge. The once confident atmosphere in the war room now replaced with an eerie silence. The resistance was everywhere. And it wasn't just the military that fought anymore. It was everyone. Every man, woman, and child who had been forced into the fight for survival. "Commander," General Thras spoke, his voice weary but firm. "Our resources are dwindling. The humans have been sabotaging our supply lines, and we are unable to maintain our energy grid. Our fleet is crippled, and if this continues, we risk losing the war." Zoreth stood still, her gaze focused on the holomap of Earth that hovered before her. The resistance had not only destroyed Xoran energy sources, but they had also cut off supply chains, attacked critical infrastructure, and disrupted troop movements. The humans were everywhere. They had learned how to strike with surgical precision, exploiting every weakness in the Xoran strategy. "Then we will strike at the heart," Zoreth said, her voice cold and sharp. "If we cannot win through strength, we will make them see the cost of defying us." Meanwhile, in the heart of the human resistance, Captain Harlow and his team had just completed another successful sabotage operation. The humans were adapting at an astounding rate. What had once been a ragtag collection of civilians was now a finely tuned, highly effective force. Harlow had witnessed firsthand the transformation. People who had been ordinary citizens just weeks ago were now hardened soldiers, fighting for something greater than survival. "We're hitting them where it hurts," Harlow said to his unit, his face set in grim determination. "We've taken out their power stations, their communications. Now it's time to go for the heart of their operation." The plan was risky, perhaps the most dangerous move yet. The humans intended to launch a full-scale assault on one of the Xoran's central command ships, a massive vessel that controlled the fleet's strategic operations. If they succeeded, it could cripple the Xoran invasion effort for good. But the risk was immense. The Xorans were not only technologically advanced, but they were also ruthless. This would be humanity's last stand. As the resistance prepared for their assault, Zoreth's thoughts were equally consumed with the decision she now faced. Her forces were scattered, morale was low, and reports of defections within her ranks were becoming more frequent. The humans, no matter how much the Korans destroyed, refused to break. There was something about their will, their sheer defiance, that made them impossible to defeat. Zoreth paced, her mind racing through calculations and strategies. There were only two choices left: annihilation or negotiation. She had considered the second option, perhaps offering the humans a peace deal, a way for them to save face. But Zoreth knew that the Xorans had never negotiated in defeat. There was no way she could present herself as anything but the conqueror. Not after everything they had done. "Prepare the fleet," Zoreth ordered finally, determination flickering in her eyes. "We will go for the final blow. We will take the humans' leadership down in one strike. That will break their will once and for all." At the same time, Harlow and his unit were gearing up for their own final strike. The mission was set. Their objective: to board and destroy the Xoran Central Command Ship, a colossal vessel orbiting the planet's surface. They knew it was a suicide mission, but it was the only chance they had. "We can't afford to fail," Harlow said, his voice steely. "We hit them hard and fast. No hesitation." The resistance fighters were already moving, crossing through underground tunnels and hidden pathways, avoiding Xoran detection systems. As they neared the target zone, the urgency in the air was palpable. There was no turning back now. It wasn't just about fighting for Earth's freedom. It was about sending a message to the Xorans that they had underestimated humanity's will to survive. The first wave of Xoran reinforcements landed, storming through the streets of New York. It was chaos. The humans fought back with everything they had, using every weapon, every scrap of technology, and every tactic they had learned over the past weeks. The streets ran red with the blood of both soldiers and civilians, but still, The resistance pushed forward. They were fighting for their homes, for their families, and for a future free of invaders. Zorath watched from the bridge of her flagship as her forces engaged in a brutal battle across the city. She knew the humans were fighting with a desperation that made them even more dangerous. The invasion, once so promising, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. "This is the endgame," Zorath murmured to herself. "One way or another, this will be over." Back on the ground, Harlow's team reached the Xoran ship. It was massive, surrounded by defensive energy shields, and guarded by hundreds of elite Xoran soldiers. But the humans were prepared. They planted explosives at the ship's main power core, setting the countdown for their final assault. "Now or never," Harlow muttered. With a blast of gunfire and a wave of determination, they charged, ready to make history. The final assault was underway. The air was thick with the tension of an impending battle that would determine the fate of Earth. For weeks, the Xorans had waged war with unrelenting force, convinced that humanity would be crushed under the weight of their advanced technology. But the humans had defied every expectation. They had adapted, fought back, and proven that their spirit could not be broken. Now, with the fate of the planet hanging in the balance, both sides prepared for the ultimate confrontation. Captain Harlow's team was in position. The massive Xoran command ship loomed before them, its dark silhouette cutting against the swirling clouds of Earth's atmosphere. The vessel was a symbol of everything the Xorans had planned for their invasion. If they could destroy it, they would sever the head of the Xoran war machine. It was their last chance. "Stay focused," Harlow said, his voice calm but determined. "We've trained for this moment. We get in, plant the charges, and get out. No mistakes." The team nodded in silent agreement, their faces grim but resolute. They knew the risks. They knew that even if they succeeded, they might not survive. But failure wasn't an option. The world they had fought for, the world they still had a chance to save, was at stake. The team moved with precision, sliding through the shadows of the Xoran ship's underbelly, avoiding patrols and security systems. The explosive charges they carried could destabilize the ship's core, sending it into a catastrophic chain reaction. It was a weapon of last resort. If they could get close enough, plant the charges, and get away before the ship's defenses locked on them, they could change the course of the war. But as they neared the heart of the command ship, the air crackled with the sound of Xoran ships descending into the atmosphere. Zorath had launched a final offensive against Earth's last remaining human strongholds, determined to break their resistance once and for all. The Xorans were not just fighting for victory. They were fighting for survival. They could not afford to lose. Zorath stood in the command center of her flagship, watching the chaotic scenes unfold below. Her forces were advancing on New York, determined to crush the remaining pockets of resistance. But the longer the battle dragged on, the more she could feel the grip on victory slipping from her hands. Every move she made, every plan she set in motion, seemed to be countered by the humans' ingenuity. And now, they were attacking her very heart. "Commander," General Thras reported, "we've detected human forces infiltrating our command ship. They're attempting to disable our core." Zorath's eyes narrowed. "Activate all defense systems. Do not let them reach the power core." But as the words left her mouth, the alarms began to blare. The ship was already under attack. Explosions rocked the vessel as the human sabotage efforts tore through the interior. Zorath's heart raced. The unthinkable was happening. Her perfect invasion was crumbling. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the battle for New York had reached its peak. The human resistance fought with everything they had, pushing back against wave after wave of Xoran forces. Captain Harlow's team had planted the charges, but they were now surrounded. The Xorans had deployed their elite soldiers in a last-ditch effort to protect their command ship, and the human team was pinned down, unable to escape. "We've done our part," Harlow said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "Now we need to get out. Go, go." The team sprinted toward the extraction point, but the Xorans weren't making it easy. The sound of heavy footsteps and blaster fire echoed through the corridors of the ship as Xoran soldiers closed in. Harlow could hear their footsteps growing louder, the pressure mounting with every passing second. He glanced at the countdown timer on his wrist. They had less than 5 minutes to reach the extraction zone before the charges detonated. "Move faster," Harlow shouted, urgency in his voice. "We're almost there." But as they rounded the corner, they were met with a wall of Xoran soldiers. Harlow's heart sank. There was no way they would make it through. "We don't have time for this," Harlow yelled as he raised his weapon and opened fire. His team followed suit, providing covering fire as they fought their way through the soldiers. But for every Xoran they dropped, 2 more seemed to take their place. Suddenly, an explosion shook the ship, and a deep tremor ran through the corridors. The charges had been triggered. "Go! Now!" Harlow screamed. The team sprinted toward the nearest airlock, but the ship was already beginning to shake violently. The Xoran command ship was collapsing in on itself, the power core destabilizing from the explosive charges. The countdown had reached 0. As they reached the airlock, the world seemed to slow. Harlow slammed the door control, and the hatch closed just as the ship erupted in a deafening explosion. A shockwave rippled through the atmosphere, shaking the very ground beneath them. The Xoran flagship was gone. From the surface, the humans could see the sky light up as the Xoran command ship burned. It was a victory, a hard-won triumph. But the cost had been high. Harlow and his team had sacrificed everything to stop the Xorans and free their world. And though the battle was far from over, humanity had proven one undeniable truth: they would never bow to invaders. Zoreth watched from her command ship as the last remnants of the Xoran fleet began to retreat. Her dream of conquest had turned to ashes. The humans had defied her at every turn. And now, it was clear, they had won. "Send out a message," Zoreth ordered, her voice cold. "We will leave Earth. But remember this, we will return. And next time, we will be ready." With those final words, the Xorans began their retreat from Earth, leaving behind a battered, but defiant, planet. The war was over. Humanity had won.